Kolagadi Reserve. As scorching winds battered the vast grasslands of South Africa during the dry season, the ground cracked and the air filled with dust. One afternoon, as the sun slanted westward, a lone elephant appeared near the observation deck. She moved silently, far from the other herd members. Her imposingly massive trunk was striking, but what was truly strange was the extraordinary swelling of her abdomen. The rangers immediately grabbed their binoculars. At first, they thought she was pregnant, but her behavior cast doubt on that notion. She moved slowly, struggled mightily to forage, and gasped for air with every step. As usual, she preferred solitude to the herd's protection. They temporarily dubbed her Big Belly Lady and began recording her daily movements. Over the 2 weeks of observation, her belly grew heavier. After eating, she often lay in one place for several hours. One young ranger in particular jokingly remarked that she was pregnant with a massive calf, but the team leader simply shook his head and looked away. There was deep anxiety in her eyes. The elephant's reproductive instincts appeared weakened. Normally, as parturition approaches, female elephants retreat to safe havens, moving with the herd to protect their calves. But this female instead had taken up residence in an abandoned, brush-lined wasteland at the very edge of the reserve. Although it had been enclosed years ago, abandoned to be swallowed by nature, it still bore traces of humans. She had chosen to live there quietly. The rangers now began to suspect a physical abnormality. Her loneliness had deepened, and her behavior had become unusually withdrawn. At night, she would lie motionless for hours, alone in the bushes, near shallow marshes. Rarely seen during the day, the elephant was only detectable by thermal imaging cameras at night. A deep groan, sometimes piercing the silence of the night, could be heard, painful, muffled, and suppressed. The rangers now monitored her not only with binoculars, but also with advanced thermal cameras and motion detectors. Nightly observation shifts were held, no one willing to let her die alone. The question gnawing at everyone was the same. What was inside this enormous expectant mother? And was it just a baby to be born, or was it the beginning of a greater tragedy? One day, from noon until evening, she licked her belly repeatedly with her tongue. Her enormous trunk slowly circled her belly, her eyes staring at the ground, their expressions hazy. Her head hovered almost at ground level, as if not exhaustion, but an inner despair had descended upon her. But what truly worried her was the stillness in her belly. It hadn't moved for days. A pregnant elephant, approaching part of the birth process, would stir, clearly showing signs of the growing life within. But this female had a deathly silence. A young ranger on the conservation team named Jonah, crouched in the bushes in silence, spoke with concern. Maybe she ate something in that old dump. Maybe she was poisoned. While the idea seemed absurd at first, the landscape still contained rusted cans, plastic waste, and chemical residue. And in her attempt to feed by sifting through nature, the elephant might have inadvertently ingested something harmful. In the days that followed, she had almost completely stopped eating. Most of the time, he lay motionless in the old riverbed, covered with cracked earth. Even at night, he didn't move, his pulse barely audible in the moonlight. His steps slowed as the days went by, each walk taking hours. His massive body felt as if it were collapsing from within. And on the 15th morning, the expected happened. He couldn't get up. His eyes were half open, his gaze wandering in space. His belly, however, was swollen beyond its previous height, practically touching the ground. The rangers had no time to wait. They had to act now or lose him completely. The emergency signal was immediately issued. The nearby veterinary station and the Southern Region Wildlife Rescue Team were alerted. That afternoon, a specialized vehicle appeared along the dusty path. It carried anesthesia equipment and a fully equipped veterinarian. When the vehicle stopped, everyone held their breath for a moment. A tranquilizer shot, fired from a carefully chosen angle with a skillfully prepared rifle, struck its target directly. The giant elephant slowly sank to its knees, then rolled onto its side. A light blanket was placed over her to cushion her fall, to absorb the shock and keep her heart from straining. Jonah and 2 colleagues rushed to her side. They placed her on a large stretcher and tried to regulate her pulse and breathing. Handling such a large creature wasn't easy, but it was a race against time. When they arrived at the rescue center, the veterinarians immediately prepared ultrasounds and x-rays. After ensuring the elephant was immobile, The instruments were carefully positioned and the images were taken. And when the results came back, everyone was stunned. There was no calf in her womb, no sign of life, no fetal form. This giant creature, thought to be pregnant, was growing not life, but something else. There was no calf inside her womb. Instead, a strange mass had appeared deep within her stomach. Initially difficult to identify on the ultrasound, the mass resembled a solid object, as if artificial, heavy, and unresponsive as a stone. But the reflections around it revealed that the pressure it was exerting on her digestive system had reached significant levels. The colon had shifted, the stomach was completely compressed, and the intestines were swollen. The first signs of infection, ulcers, and even tissue death were flashing on the screens. The veterinarians quickly conducted a consultation. The team leader coldly announced the decision. Surgery is necessary this very night. Otherwise, the internal organs will fail one by one. This was now more than just a rescue operation. The team leader continued sternly. We're not just saving an elephant, we're keeping a symbol alive. A remarkable surgery was planned for that night. Two of the region's most qualified wildlife veterinarians were summoned to the center. Heart monitors, ventilators, and support machines suitable for large-bodied animals were prepared. The operating room was sterilized, lights suspended from the ceilings. There was a quiet preparation, but the tension in the air weighed heavily on everyone's shoulders. Time seemed to stand still as the surgical team donned sterile surgical gowns that reached their knees. For a moment, everyone even held their breath. Outside the operating room, Jonah stood with his hands clasped tightly, his head bowed in prayer. His eyes were red. He wanted more than anything for this giant creature he had watched for days, lived with, and had practically become a part of him to live. Hold on, he murmured. Please hold on. The surgery began in silence. The light focused directly on the elephant's abnormally swollen abdomen. The surgeons carefully made an incision down the center of the massive body. As the first tissues were cut, the intense smell of gas and pus from within overwhelmed everyone. But they still didn't know what to expect. Exactly 1 hour and 20 minutes later, when the doctors reached the inner cavity of the abdomen, the entire team was plunged into a profound silence. Their eyes met. No one could speak. Inside, a massive mass almost completely filled the stomach cavity. From the outside, it looked like stone, but its composition was different. Plastic, half-digested plastic bags, candy wrappers, bottle caps, torn pieces of cloth, brightly colored nylon rope, cans and black wires from garbage bags. This mass had formed as the elephant desperately devoured whatever it found in that old dump to survive. It was a deathly mixture of hunger, desperation, and instinct. One of the veterinarians whispered, "This isn't just a stomach. This is a disgrace to humanity." Over time, hard pieces of garbage had rubbed against the stomach lining, causing deep ulcers and tears. In some areas, the tissue had begun to decompose and pus had spread to the stomach lining. The doctors were speechless at what they saw. They had dealt with many wild animal cases before, but this was something else. This was a physical mark of desperation, neglect, and human error. Every piece of garbage was removed with the utmost care and precision. Plastic bags, candy wrappers, soda caps, brightly colored ribbons, pieces of fishing nets, and unbroken cans. Every single piece was picked up, cleaned, and set aside. These were not only evidence of the surgery, but also of a crime scene. Silent witnesses to a crime against nature. One of the nurses present paused as she reached for a sheet of plastic. On it, in still legible blue letters, was written, "Thank you." Tears welled up in her eyes. Then she bowed her head and began to sob. That remark became a bitter irony in this scene. The surgical team washed the internal cavity with a special antiseptic solution. This step was crucial. Even the slightest microbe could have disastrous consequences. The area around the internal organs was gently cleaned. Blood and dead tissue were removed, making everything sterile. Then the stitching process began. The layers of tissue were carefully closed, one by one. A drainage tube was inserted into the abdomen so that the accumulated fluid could be drained. Approximately 4 hours later, the arduous surgery was over. The giant elephant was still alive. When the doctors emerged, their faces were filled with hope mixed with exhaustion. The guards waiting outside the operating room were overcome with emotion as soon as they heard the results. They began to weep silently. Jonah closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He put his hands in his pockets, raised his head to the sky, and murmured, "We left this garbage there, and today we're trying to make up for that mistake, even if only a little." The elephant was taken to the intensive care unit, his body soundly asleep but breathing regularly. His trunk slowly drooped, his eyelids motionless, but his heart was still beating. Jonah sat at the head of his bed. He waited there, motionless in the stillness of the night until morning. His eyes never left him. "Hang on," he whispered again. "You belong to nature. Maybe we can undo what we did to you." For the first 2 days, he didn't eat or drink anything, but hourly checks showed his vitals were stable. His pulse was within normal limits. His breathing moved like a rhythmic melody on the monitors. And on the morning of the 3rd day, the elephant blinked his eyelids. He lifted his head slightly and slowly offered his trunk to the doctor waiting beside him. He touched the human hand with his rough, dry skin, then gently licked it. Laughter erupted in the room. That moment wasn't just a sign of recovery. It was a miracle. After all the effort, sleepless nights, and hopeful anticipation, the rangers and veterinary team decided to give her a new name. She was no longer simply Big Belly Lady. She would be known by her official name, Terra. This name, meaning life in the local Tuana language, represented her rebirth. So close to death, she had chosen life. The veterinarians prepared a special liquid diet to slowly allow her stomach to recover. It included crushed meat fibers, balanced mineral water, and natural fibers. Each day, Terra was fed small amounts, accepting her food by slowly extending her trunk. Each meal was meticulously planned to allow her digestive system to function again. In the first week in the recovery area, she could only lift her head, but by the 2nd week, she was standing. When she took her first steps, everyone around her was in tears. Slowly, shakily, but determinedly, she walked in a small circle. The rangers came to see her every day. Some brought their favorite leaves, others sat quietly beside her, calling her name, speaking to her like a friend. Terra's presence was no longer just an elephant's. It was a symbol of memory, resistance, and awakening. A wildlife photographer documented Terra's recovery process step by step. She began sharing the images on social media. Those images, the scars in those images, the hope in her eyes, the first steps taken, soon spread throughout South Africa. Then, around the world. People were horrified. The photo of piles of plastic trash emerging from a wild elephant's stomach received thousands of shares. The piece of plastic with the words "thank you" on it, in particular, touched many hearts. Following this post, a major awareness campaign was launched across the region. Save wildlife from plastic. Schools taught children about the damage plastic waste causes to nature and animals. Teachers included Terra's story in their textbooks. People from surrounding villages began volunteering around the reserve to collect, sort, and support the recycling system. Large signs were hung at all the entrances to the reserve. "Don't kill the second Terra." The Ministry of Environment launched a project to completely clean up the former dumping ground on the edge of the Kologati. This land, neglected for years, was now being cleaned up in memory of a symbol. Terra's image was printed on t-shirts, posters, even the covers of children's books. Her massive body and hopeful eyes were now part of the collective conscience of not only wildlife enthusiasts, but also the public. Rangers began to be trained. They no longer just monitored animals. They were also specialized in identifying animals that had ingested plastic or foreign objects. Terra was a victim, but she had also caused hundreds of people to change their way of life. National television invited Jonah to the program. As he stepped before the cameras, he took a deep breath. He paused for a moment before speaking. Then, his voice trembling, he said, We caused his death by what we put in his stomach. But today, thanks to his survival, we have learned to respect life again. Terra has taught us not only to forgive nature, but also to forgive ourselves. Terra woke us up. Her silent cry echoed around the world. People saw not the garbage from an elephant's stomach, but their own responsibility. The waste accumulating on her body was, in fact, the embodiment of our negligence. Numerous international environmental organizations sent letters to the Colagatti rescue team, expressing their sincere gratitude. Their timely intervention, sensitive approach, and actions befitting human dignity were cited as examples. But the real thanks came from Terra. Although she couldn't speak, her presence spoke to millions. Terra still lives, but her influence has now transcended the limits of a single living being. Her story was captured in a special photo book, Garbage Belly, The Judgment of Nature. Its pages revealed the traces of both a physical and spiritual journey. The book wasn't just a collection of photographs, it was a document of an awakening. It was distributed to thousands of libraries worldwide and taught in environmental classes. The Colagatti Reserve was also transformed. The area was declared South Africa's first plastic-free wildlife area. With new funding, waste collection systems were installed, sensors were installed on the fences, and rangers received advanced training. It wasn't just a reserve anymore. It was the land where a conscience had blossomed. And then, exactly 67 days later, the big moment arrived. Terra was released back to her birthplace, the boundless grasslands. Dozens of rangers, veterinarians, volunteers, and members of the media gathered in the early morning hours. Everyone was silent. Breaths were held. The cage door slowly opened. Terra stood for a moment, her head still. Then she put one foot out and stepped onto the ground. Then the other. When she left the cage and reached the grassland, she turned her head. Her eyes were calm. There was no fear in them, only a profound wisdom and a weary confidence. It was as if she were saying, "I'm ready. What about you?" Then she began walking toward the sun. Her steps were strong. Her body was upright. Those behind her could not hold back their tears as they watched her. Jonah smiled faintly as he slowly wiped the binoculars in his hand. His eyes were teary, but his heart was at peace. He watched Terra until she disappeared behind the tall grass. He said nothing. No words were needed. That day, Terra left her footprints in the ground, but the world left her a mark in the deepest part of her heart. That mark was the mark of a life, and it was nature's silent but profound warning. And what about you? What are your thoughts after reading this story? Please share your thoughts with us in the comments. Remember, a living being's fate can be changed by the mark you leave.